Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Fran, I'm from Venezuela, and today we're going to be reacting to a video called UK versus Australian architecture. I didn't know that houses in Australia were different, so I'm really interested in learning how different they are from houses in the UK. Obviously, every country and probably every city up to a certain point has its own like architecture and little like characteristics that make it, their own. But I'm really curious to see like how they are different. I know like for instance, the cars in the UK, you drive them to the other side of the road, and in Australia, I think it's the same. So how different could houses be? So let's check it out, and don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. So let's hit play.
On migration blog dreamingofdownunder.com. Today I'm going to run through some of the differences between houses in the UK and houses in Australia. I grew up in the UK, but I've also house sat in around 100 homes in Sydney over the last few years, and I've noticed quite a lot of differences between homes in each country. There will be variations across Australia agent. Because the climate varies so much, but these are the things I've noticed in Sydney homes. I've also written.
Okay, so I think probably the main difference from what I'm gathering is because the climates are very different. Australia is obviously like very hot compared to the UK. So probably houses are going to be probably bigger. I'm guessing houses in the UK are smaller because the climate is colder. So they're probably smaller because it helps conserve heat. I don't know. And probably because Australia is so hot and probably humid, it has more like open spaces, probably more gardens and like front yards. That's probably a difference as well. And chimneys. I'm guessing houses in the UK, it's common for them to have chimneys, and probably in Australia it's not that
post on this, which I'll link below.
Common.
If you're interested in moving to Australia from the UK or vice versa, here's what to expect in your new home. So the first difference between houses in Australia and the UK is that in the UK you tend to have a whole row of houses along a road that have the same design repeated over and over, whereas in Australia
like
you can
American
have every
suburbs.
house on a road being completely different. And I think this is due to people buying land in Australia and then having a home built on it, rather than people buying existing homes like they do in the UK.
People be some pre-mixture, yeah. I actually love that. I don't really tend to like, like American architecture, because it's, the suburb, especially like the suburbs, everything's very like same. And when you enter a neighborhood, you can't really like see which house is different and which house is, like yours or anything. They're just the same. And I don't like it. I like houses to be unique. I think it shows a lot of character from part of the owners, and probably the ones that built it or the ones that own the house. So I love the fact that I know that some people don't like it and they prefer everything to be like the same, because it creates a sense of like unity. And when you enter a neighborhood, it's like everything's the same, like everything looks nice. But personally, I don't really like it. I prefer show your individuality, and just, like, it doesn't matter if one house has like, I don't know, all glass white and it has like 3 floors, and then your neighbor has like a little cute like wooden shack on one floor. I love it. I think I like that, especially because also not even if you live there, but maybe if you live there too. But when you're visiting a new neighborhood, I love just like checking out all the different houses, because everything, like, you have like gorgeous houses, but if everything's the same, then you don't really have that. It's just like you've seen one, you've seen them all. Like, there's no need to like visit the neighborhood.
Some of the older housing in Australia is repetitive, like the old terraces and federation homes that you have in Sydney, but generally you've got a really wide variation of housing styles along the same street.
So there are some houses that are neighborhoods that are like the same.
Houses in Australia usually have a veranda across the front of the house, and this creates shade across the front window, and it's also quite a nice feature because people put chairs and benches on them that face out into the street.
Yeah, it's nice like having coffee in the morning, probably like that when you're looking at the
if you've got space. So this is just a small glass room on the front of your front door, basically, where you store shoes and umbrellas and things, but they do get quite hot if they're in the sun, so it wouldn't really work in Australia.
Oh yeah, yeah. They have the little corridor, and of course, yeah. In the UK, you need them because obviously it rains a lot and it snows and it's cold, so people take off their jackets and they have like boots that are disgusting because maybe it was snowy or rainy and you don't want to like dirty up the whole house. So the minute you get in, obviously, like there's a little like shoe thing for you to like take off your shoes and boots and put them there. But in Australia, obviously, and it's indoors. Obviously, you can't really have that in Australia. It's nice because it's wide open, and because obviously it would be like it would get hot, but the other way around, obviously, it wouldn't work because it rains. So you need a roof.
If you look up at the roofs on Australian houses, you'll see that the eaves overhang the
Speaking
house
of
much
roofs.
more than in the UK, and this creates shade against the windows.
To put
in the
shade,
UK,
yeah.
the eaves are really small, and you get as much light as possible against the windows.
It's
and as
true.
much
I haven't
warmth from
noticed
the
that.
sun.
It's true.
The windows themselves are
Yeah, the
different
sun in
between
Australia is
Australian and
no
British
joke.
homes. So in Australia, in the older homes, you'll often have wooden framed sash windows. And in the newer homes, you'll have
wood.
big
Okay.
metal frames around your windows, and they'll slide open sideways rather than opening outwards. In the UK,
yeah,
you
like a
have
slide-
nearly
a
always
slide
double
door.
glazing, which you don't seem to have in Australia. And you normally have the thick plastic frames and windows that open outwards. You also have
that's
a
really
layer
interesting.
of mesh, which is called a screen, over Australian windows, so that when you open them, flies and
With
insects can't
bugs.
come in.
Yeah,
In
it's
Australia,
because of
it's really
bugs.
common to have a screen door, which means that when you open your front or back door, you have a second door next to it, which is usually made
Okay,
of
yeah.
mesh, and that just means you can keep the door open, have the breeze coming through, but no
Yeah,
insects
breeze
can
come in,
as long
but
as
you
keep
have
the
to,
screen door
you have the
closed.
door open.
In Australia, it's really
Yeah, in
common
the
to have a
UK, obviously, like that doesn't really work. You just have like one door and that's it. But I think that's the double doors and the screen door is very common in places, in very humid places and hot places. And also, like for instance, in the US, they also have that. A lot of places, a lot of states down in the South, they have that because of bugs. And I think it's a common feature in a lot of like beachy places or just places that get a lot of humidity all year round. And I think because humidity, like it brings out of bugs, and you don't want bugs to get in your house. But it's so hot that you're always like, I want to have the door open because the breeze gets in, and you're not like boiling
laundry room
inside
or
of the
utility room
room.
for your washing machine. In the UK, unless you've got a large house, you normally have to have your washing machine in the kitchen. I don't think I've ever seen that in Australia.
Oh, in the
Sometimes in
kitchen.
older flats,
Yeah.
they might
I
have
think it's a
communal
common
laundry,
feature
but
in
most of the
smaller
apartments I've
places.
been
They
in have had a
have
separate laundry room.
they have like the oven on one hand or like the fridge, and then there's like a little maybe it's hidden, maybe it's not, but usually I think it's hidden. It's like a little I don't know, like a cupboard, but not a cupboard. And you have like your laundry machine and your dryer and your washing machine. But I know there's places where because this place like it's really small. It's like a really small apartment, so you don't get to have that. You don't even get to have that. So it's like you have like your oven, and right next to it, it's like it's a washing machine and a dryer. So it's okay. But I think it's also because probably houses in the UK are smaller, so you don't have that much space. In Australia, you can have like your
Inside the
your laundry
apartment.
room.
In Australia, it's really common to have open plan
Oh, and it's also obviously some places have like laundry rooms that are sort of like shared between apartment units, and that also saves space. But again, it's the
So
thing
the
about
living
not
room,
having that much
dining
space.
room, and kitchen are all basically one open room. Whereas in the UK, your kitchen is nearly
At the
always
top,
separate,
they
and
have
then your
open-
living room and
open
dining room
space.
sometimes are knocked through, but it's normally separate rooms.
I think that's very
In
like
Australia,
an
it's
antique
much more
thing.
common to live in a bungalow
It gives me
or
like
a
very
one-story
vintage
house
vibes to
than
have everything
two-story
separate.
houses. Whereas in the UK, bungalows are quite scarce and usually something that older people go for because they don't have stairs. If you do have a two-story house in Australia, you can get really,
because
really
obviously
hot.
when you're older, you probably have less mobility and you're probably more scared of falling down the stairs. So obviously it's more comfortable to
on the
stairs are
second floor if
dangerous.
you don't have aircon. In the UK, you have
but not
a
having
letterbox
aircon.
on
I
your
don't know
front
that
door,
was a
so
thing in
basically
Australia.
a little hole in your front door. Whereas in Australia, you have a standalone letterbox that's
Yeah, the letterbox, but the UK one, of course, it's like Harry Potter, like very the famous little like slot where the cards and the letters, I mean, would just like go and go and go and like it overfill the whole room. But I think again, I like the fact that they have like a little box. I prefer the little box because and you can like decorate it, or I don't know, it's just, I think it's nicer than just, someone like arriving and, having letters down on the floor. I like the act of like checking your
Out
box
facing onto the
and see
street.
if there's any mail.
One of the biggest complaints that I hear from expats in Australia is how cold the houses get in Australia in the winter. So since Australian houses are built to stay
they
cool,
do get cold.
they're very often much colder inside than a British house would be in the same temperature. So generally in the daytime,
That's actually quite interesting. I could imagine like it gets colder, but yeah, it's because of air conditioning. People go overboard and they like, no, I refuse to be hot in here. And of course, because everyone has air conditioning, and I don't think the UK people actually do. I don't think it's that common for people to
inside
get
the house in Australia than outside.
like,
Whereas in the UK, it's the opposite.
comes.
It's nearly always warmer inside your house than outside.
Yeah, of
One
course
house
it's
I
warm
stayed in, it
because
had a
it's colder.
plug-in heater that had the temperature on, and when I woke up in the mornings, it was usually about 9 degrees inside. So having central heating throughout your house is really rare in Australia, and if people do have it, it's usually
No one
through
really
air
does
vents
have it.
rather than the radiators on the wall like we have in the UK. What some houses have
Because
in
again,
Australia
it's
is
colder.
a standalone gas heater that's attached to a gas pipe either coming out of the floor or the wall. You can also buy small oil heaters in Australia that you plug in if you just want to heat at one room.
Oh, like
Having
the ones
a
that you
fire
see on the
wall
street
in the living
sometimes in
room
cold
isn't
places.
very common in Australia. I have seen it in a few houses, but very few compared to the UK. Some of the older houses in
makes sense.
Australia quite often have chimney breasts and really nice original fireplaces, but they're not really used as much as they are in the UK.
Yeah, I don't think people use a
Obviously,
lot of
aircon
chimneys.
is more
I
common in
love
Australia than in
chimneys.
the UK, but not as many houses have it in Sydney as I expected actually. So looking at
that's
the back of
interesting.
the houses,
So do they
in
use
Australia
fans?
it's also common to have a veranda on the back of the house as well as the front. Or if you don't have a veranda, there's usually
I
some
like
kind
it.
of solid covering that shades the patio. Whereas in the UK, you would rarely have a
They all
covering
have
over your patio.
shades.
You try and get as much light and heat as possible.
Of course, you want to get a lot.
Conservatories
Yeah,
also-
of course, because I think they rarely get sun, so you have to get like every single ray of light. So why would I want to put like
But
a
don't seem
roof
to
or
exist in Australia.
shade
So this is
on top of
basically an
it?
extension on the back of your house that's usually made of glass. And these are really common in the UK,
Like a
but I don't
greenhouse.
think that would be possible in Australia with the heat. Having a swimming pool in your back
Because it
garden
would get
is
you
obviously
gonna be
much more common
frying
in
there.
Australia than it is in the UK. It's not as common
Oh,
as I
everyone has
thought
a
it would
pool,
be
of course.
actually, although I would think going further north where it's hotter, it's probably more common to have a swimming pool.
Okay, makes sense.
The bathrooms in Australia are
Houses
quite
with
different to in
swimming
the
pools,
UK.
love them.
So in the UK you can't have plug sockets
Okay.
in your bathroom normally, and in Australia you always have plug sockets. This is apparently due to some difference with the electrical systems in Australian houses. That means it's safe to have sockets in bathrooms where
Yeah,
it can get wet.
because it's going to vary, of course,
Also, the
depending
light
on the
switches
country.
are different in Australia. So in the UK, in your bathroom, you always have a pull cord so that you don't have to touch a switch if you're wet. And in Australia, it's just a
You know what? I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I think those like little cords for me it signifies the house is quite old. I think that's like a vintage thing. And if I get into a house and if I see that, I'm gonna be thinking like this house is very old, probably. Like they left that antique feature in this house because I don't know, but that's just maybe I'm just me. Because obviously like switches, I think they're more modern, so I would guess like almost all houses these days have like switches.
normal light switch. And they also nearly always have fans in the bathroom, so you'll have a switch with a light on, the
Fans
fan
in the
on, and
bathroom.
occasionally
I didn't know
also
that
a
was
heat
just
switch
it
where you have
it
heated
wasn't
light
like a
bulbs.
normal thing.
This is a strange little
heated
difference,
light
but
bulbs.
in Australia,
That's
the
nice.
side of bathtubs are nearly always solid, so they're quite often tiled, whereas in the UK, you tend to have a plastic panel. And I remember an Australian friend saying that she went to Wales and found this really strange because she'd never seen that before. Also, sinks in
it's
Australia, you nearly
plastic.
always have a cupboard underneath a sink in the bathroom, which we call a vanity. In the UK, it's more common just to have a
Vanity, yeah.
sink on a stand. In Australia,
Oh, but once again, I would think that's just like a modern thing versus an old thing. But because I think these days it's more common to see the little cupboard, the little vanity, because they don't have like an actual. It's just like I don't know the part where you wash your hands. It's like it belongs to the vanity itself. It's not just like the little thing with like the ceramic, like stand. But again, I think it's probably like more modern to have a vanity, I think. Or maybe it's just more commonplace
They
these
also have a
days.
few differences with household terminology. So what we call a sofa or a settee in the UK, Australians would call a lounge. And what we'd call a lounge or a
Yeah.
living room in the UK, Australians would call the lounge room. Also, bedding
Okay.
and towels in Australia, they call this Manchester, which is meant to be from the olden days when cotton items had to be imported from Manchester in the UK.
From Manchester.
Also,
That's
duvet,
weird. The
doona in
bedding is
Australia.
Manchester.
They do use the word quilt as well, though. A flat or apartment in
duvet.
Australia is called a unit.
Oh, okay. So something interesting. Like imagine calling a duvet. To me, like it's where a duvet is like a universal thing, but a duna. I mean, I would be like, what on earth is a duna? They made their own like little words for everything. And flat, a flat is just like an apartment. I don't know, a flat. And it's really a unit. For me, a unit, I don't know, it involves more. I don't know. I don't even know what I would think if like someone would tell me I just moved to a unit. I would be like, what is that?
So in Australia, you can sit on a lounge in the lounge room and then go and get under your Manchester and your doona.
Up to 50% of Manchester.
Let me know
Manchester,
in the comments
what?
if there are any
What
differences
what's
I've
that?
missed. Please like and subscribe for more videos on life in Australia.
That was really weird. At least from my perspective, a lot of things that I found quite weird and different. The Manchester thing like really threw me off. Like the Manchester, like, can you get me a duvet? It's like, no, can you get me a Manchester? It would be like, I would get you what? A cotton Manchester. I love it, and yeah, I think the main differences are probably all due to the different climate. They're different climates. One's colder, one's hotter. One gets a lot of sun, the other one doesn't. So they have to take advantage because it rains all the time. It's obviously clouded. So you have to like get the most out of that vitamin D. And they want to squeeze like every single drop. And of course, because it's hot, it's very cold. You want to keep warm. Whereas in Australia, it's the complete opposite. The sun is very dangerous. You get sun almost, I think, yearly. It's yearly. I don't think because I know they have a winter, but the sun itself, like it's no joke. I think because obviously they're situated like in their planet. Like it's very. I think they get more sun just because of where they're situated, and people have to be like very careful about it. Skin cancer is very dangerous and it's no joke. And people in Australia, actually, I think they do get it quite a lot. So obviously, houses are designed for that not to be a problem. So they have, that you can't really have a lot of glass things because you're going to be like an ant in the sun with like a little piece of glass. So obviously, like that's not a thing. And yeah, I think it's and the chimney things. I was surprised to learn that some houses in Australia do have chimneys. That's probably also like an old thing. Old houses probably do have them. But it's also very nice. I think it gives them like a little like centerpiece to a room. It adds a little something extra. But that was really interesting, and I loved it, and I hope you also find it interesting. But I'll see you next time. Bye.